The sheriff was yelling at her to put her hands where he could see them. Karen was screeching that I locked her out of her neighborhood. Meanwhile, my DA badge was shining in the sun, and the ranch gate she trespassed through was rigged for a sting. She had no idea she just walked into a federal investigation. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. Now, you're probably wondering how we got here. It started 6 months ago when I bought the ranch. After 15 years of busting drug labs and watching suburban war zones bloom behind picket fences, I wanted peace. Real peace. Cows, silence, and a damn good view of the stars. My little slice of heaven was 20 acres just outside the HOA's reach. Technically, and that's where I made my first mistake. Assuming technically meant anything to someone like Karen. Karen ran the HOA like it was a Cold War surveillance state. She had her own golf cart with flashing yellow lights, a compliance clipboard, and binoculars that were way too expensive for a woman who claimed to be on a budget. I'd barely unpacked when she rolled up to my fence, twice, to introduce herself. That was code for, make passive-aggressive comments about your property. She hated my barn color, claimed it clashed with the community palette. I told her my ranch wasn't in her community. She hated my dogs, said their barking might trigger some of the retirees. I said my dogs had better manners than most retirees. She hated that I parked my truck on gravel instead of a concrete driveway. I pointed out that gravel didn't crack like her HOA's plastic sidewalk. We were off to a great start. But the moment that really kicked off this whole drama? The drone. I was brushing my horse when I heard a faint buzzing overhead. Looked up, and there it was. A shiny, little surveillance drone hovering right over my stable. Karen had apparently decided she needed aerial footage of potential violations. I waved at it, then calmly went inside, grabbed my 12-gauge, and blew the thing into plastic confetti. 20 minutes later, she was at the gate, screaming through the intercom that I destroyed private property. I reminded her that flying a drone over private land without consent was illegal. She shouted that I just made an enemy for life. I smiled and said, "Karen, I work for the government. You should be more specific." Now, I hadn't planned on weaponizing the DEA card. I really hadn't. I was off duty. My work was quiet these days, intel gathering mostly. But when Karen filed a formal complaint with the HOA, claiming my property was unregistered and in violation of setback ordinances, I knew I had to get creative. Because here's the thing, I didn't just move here for peace. I moved here because this ranch was strategically located next to a suspected cartel assets rural supply station. And we were in the middle of an active investigation, which meant Karen's drama wasn't just annoying, it was dangerous. Still, I tried to play nice. I invited the HOA board for a little get-to-know-you barbecue. Karen refused, obviously. But 2 board members came, and after 3 beers, they admitted she'd tried to get them to vote me into the HOA through some obscure annexation clause. I laughed, then asked if they knew she was using my private well to water her lawn. They didn't. See, my ranch's water system is independent. Karen, on the other hand, had tapped into it without my knowledge. I only found out because my pressure dropped at random intervals, usually around 4 a.m. I installed a monitor, traced the sudden spikes, led me straight to a PVC pipe buried under the old fence line, snaking toward her flower beds like some kind of suburban parasite. It was genius in the most obnoxious way possible. So I returned the favor. I rerouted the backup gray water tank, used for livestock waste, to that exact pipe. 2 days later, her roses were brown and her lawn stank like a septic tank exploded. She came storming up to my gate, foaming at the mouth, demanding to know if I'd sabotaged her irrigation. I told her the only thing I'd sabotaged was my faith in human decency. She told me she was filing a complaint with the water district. I told her to check her plumbing permits first. That shut her up for a week. Then came the petition. Karen went door to door collecting signatures to have my land absorbed into the HOA. I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. Half the residents she spoke to thought she was insane. The other half only signed because she promised to get that big scary man off their road. One guy apologized to me later and said, "She caught me at a bad time, I had food poisoning." Things got tense. I started getting strange letters, anonymous compliance suggestions. One said I should remove all visible firearms from public view. Another asked me to stop playing country music after 6 p.m. My favorite one simply said, "You are being watched." And then came the night I found her on my property. Motion sensors lit up like Christmas. I walked outside in boxers and boots, shotgun slung across my shoulder, and there she was, standing near the livestock gate with a crowbar in one hand and her phone in the other, probably trying to disconnect the well line manually. When I asked what the hell she was doing, she shrieked that I had cut off her water and that she was restoring her right to community resources. I locked the gate behind her. That's when she panicked and called 911, screaming that I was holding her hostage and that she was the president of the HOA. By the time the sheriff arrived, she was pacing like a lunatic. I calmly handed over my ID and my badge. The sheriff gave me a nod. Karen didn't notice that 3 other vehicles were parked nearby. Unmarked. Quiet. Armed. Because what she didn't know was that the sting was already underway. And her trespassing just gave us the perfect excuse to launch the next phase. And just when I thought it couldn't get any dumber, Karen did something that made me stop in my tracks. She filed a report accusing me of harboring drugs in my barn. That's when I realized she wasn't just annoying anymore. She was about to blow a multi-million-dollar federal operation wide open. And I was going to use her to finish it. The report she filed wasn't just a petty HOA complaint. It was an official tip to the county sheriff's office, complete with shaky cell phone photos of feed sacks and fertilizer bags in my barn. She claimed they were suspiciously stacked and that she smelled chemicals. Of course she did. That was horse feed and a compost pile. But Karen was convinced she'd single-handedly uncovered a meth lab. The level of delusion would have been funny if it wasn't now threatening to derail an undercover DEA operation 3 months in the making. The worst part? The county forwarded her complaint to the narcotics unit, standard protocol when drugs are even mentioned, and that unit just so happened to loop in a liaison officer who was part of my task force. I got the call within hours. "Hey," he said, stifling laughter, "did you know a woman named Karen just tried to report you as a cartel distributor because your barn smelled funny?" I let out a long, exhausted sigh. I told him to hold the file. No official action. Not yet. Because as annoying as Karen was, I saw something else in this. The perfect opportunity. You see, we'd been watching the guy down the road for months. A reclusive property owner with ties to a laundering operation in Phoenix. We suspected his ranch was being used as a drop point for cash and chemical precursors. But the guy was slippery. Careful. Never took risks. We needed someone dumb enough to poke the bear. And suddenly, here was Karen. Nosy. Delusional. And dumb enough to walk right into the fire. So we let her keep going. First, she tried intimidation. A week after the sheriff's visit, I got a letter from the HOA. Official header. Fancy legal language. They were attempting to annex my property into the association. They cited some outdated zoning clause that hadn't applied since the 1980s. Total nonsense. But the real kicker? They fined me $200 for unregistered livestock containment structures. That's what they called my barn. I mailed the letter back with a single sticky note. You might want to check whose name is on the Federal Registry before you keep digging this hole. That earned me a visit from Karen herself, standing at my gate in full HOA regalia, polo shirt, lanyard, clipboard, and a face like she'd sucked a lemon dipped in battery acid. She asked if I'd received her notice. I said I had. She asked if I intended to comply. I said, Karen, the last time someone ordered me to comply, they were wearing a ski mask and holding an Uzi. You're a little underdressed. She stormed off, but she wasn't done. I knew that look. She was already planning the next move. Sure enough, 2 days later, a drone flew over again. New model. Higher altitude. She thought she was being slick. But I'd upgraded my counter-surveillance too. We jammed the signal, forced it to autoland, and pulled the footage. She'd been zooming in on my barn, my shed, even my truck bed. We left the drone on her front porch with a note, "Smile next time." She must have taken that as encouragement because next, she hired a private investigator. A real bottom-shelf guy with a long lens and a rumbling old sedan that he parked behind a line of trees like we wouldn't notice. We did. We waved at him. Took photos of him taking photos of us. My team loved it. One guy set up a folding chair and started eating popcorn while staring directly into the camera. But here's where it got interesting. The investigator wasn't just watching me. He was also casing the neighbor. The one we were actually watching. Karen, in her infinite paranoia, thought we were both in cahoot. She thought she was cracking open a suburban drug ring. And when the neighbor's runner made a drop in broad daylight, Karen snapped photos and sent them, wait for it, directly to his email. She thought he was the police. He wasn't. He was on our list. The moment he received those photos, our monitoring techs flagged it. A new digital connection between Karen and a known cartel intermediary. Unwitting or not, she just inserted herself into a federal case. We didn't even have to do anything. She was digging her own grave, one HOA document and email at a time. Then came the confrontation. Karen showed up on my ranch again, uninvited, this time wearing body cam glasses and carrying a thick manila folder. She marched up to the fence and started rattling off citations, everything from unapproved exterior lighting to non-native plant species. She was filming herself like she was starring in some HOA-themed episode of Law and Order. I told her to leave. She refused. I called the sheriff. She called me a rogue element, and told him I was threatening her civic duty. He looked at me. I shrugged. He told her to leave or face trespassing charges. She left, but not before throwing the folder at my gate like a paper grenade. Inside the folder? Her full report. Photos, timelines, even a map with red marker scribbles that looked like something out of a conspiracy theorist's bunker. She'd drawn arrows between my barn and the neighbor's property, labeled them drug route and suspicious delivery point. It was absurd. It was perfect. That night we had a meeting. Me, the sheriff, and my DEA team. We decided to set the stage. We'd give Karen what she wanted, evidence. We'd plant it carefully. Nothing real. Just enough to bait her into moving one step further. We placed a sealed crate outside the barn. Labeled it fertilizer, 50 pounds. Harmless. We staged a conversation near the barn, loud enough for anyone listening. We talked about delivery times and shipment routes. Pure theater. Karen took the bait. 2 days later, her drone was back. We let it film everything. Even pretended to hide the crate under a tarp. That night, we intercepted a message from her to the same cartel runner. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was trying to barter the footage. Said she had proof of competition. Wanted to make a deal. And just like that, she crossed the line. She thought she was taking down a criminal. She didn't realize she was offering intel to one. The next morning, I got a call from my handler. The cartel runner had responded. He'd agreed to meet. Said he wanted to see her footage and talk terms. Karen said yes. She actually said yes. That's when I knew, without question, we had her. Not just for trespassing or harassment. Not just for being the worst kind of HOA dictator. No, Karen was about to walk herself into a federal conspiracy charge. On camera. With the full weight of the DEA watching. And she thought she was the hero. The irony would have been beautiful if it wasn't so dangerous. But it wasn't over yet. Because Karen didn't just plan to meet quietly. She planned to meet at my ranch, on my land, during an active sting. And that's when everything exploded. Karen picking my ranch as the meeting spot was either the boldest move she'd ever made or the dumbest, and honestly, it was a coin toss with her. Maybe she thought it would make her look like she had the upper hand. Or maybe she thought the location would scare the guy she was trying to sell to, prove she wasn't bluffing. But from my point of view, it was a gift from the heavens wrapped in HOA letterhead. Because now, instead of chasing her down or waiting for her to do something dumb enough to warrant charges, she was bringing the crime right to me. All I had to do was stand back and let her keep digging. We set it up like a performance. My team knew their marks, the timing, the cover rolls. One agent played the buyer. Another posed as my mechanic, working on the truck outside the barn. I stayed out of the main scene at first. We didn't want Karen spooked. The point was to make her feel in control, like she was walking into a transaction she initiated, with players she could manipulate. We even let her pick the time. 4:30 p.m., right when the golden hour light would make everything look cinematic on her camera glasses. She had no idea she was walking into a fully wired, fully armed federal sting. The morning of, she was giddy. You could tell. She was walking her dog along the road in her HOA polo shirt again, as if this was just another compliance check. I watched from the kitchen window, sipping coffee. My dog growled. I patted his head. Don't worry, buddy. She's about to get her collar too. At 3:45, she texted the buyer to confirm the meet. We intercepted the message and gave her the green light. At 4 o'clock, she rolled up to my gate like she owned the place, parked just outside, and let herself in through the pedestrian side gate. She didn't know the cameras were already rolling. Her voice was clear as day. Let's get this done quickly, she said. I don't want him, meaning me, to see us out here. The buyer greeted her casually, played his part perfectly, said he was interested in her footage. Karen, always dramatic, pulled out a flash drive from her bag like it was nuclear launch code. Everything's on here, she said. I've documented suspicious deliveries, unauthorized structures, possibly volatile chemicals. You said this information would be useful. He nodded and asked what she wanted in return. And that's when Karen did it. She said the words, I want immunity. And I want you to do something about that neighbor. He's breaking rules, endangering the community. He's a threat. That was it. The moment. She wasn't just an informant now. She was actively leveraging sensitive material for personal gain. That's coercion. That's obstruction. That's conspiracy. And she said it all with a smug little smile like she was reading off a list of neighborhood violations. But she wasn't done. She handed over a printed map with handwritten note, arrows, timelines, even delivery dates, which we hadn't told her. She'd guessed them based on my truck's movements and the lights in my barn. It wasn't accurate, but it was specific enough to make her look like she'd been shadowing a federal agent for months, which she had. Only, she didn't know that's what I was. The buyer asked if she had any more information. Karen glanced around, lowered her voice, and said, I think he's got partners. Maybe even cop. The sheriff's been to his place twice and left with nothing. I think they're covering for him. That did it. That wasn't just a casual accusation. That was slander against law enforcement in the middle of an active operation. My handler signaled the team. We were greenlit to move. But before we jumped, she did something so perfectly Karen, I couldn't believe it. She called 911. Right there, standing in the middle of my ranch, she dialed the emergency line and told dispatch she was negotiating with a criminal and needed police presence to ensure compliance. I couldn't make this up if I tried. She thought she was running a sting. She thought she was baiting me. She had no idea every phone call she made was being recorded by us. Every word was being logged. Every step she took was monitored. The sheriff pulled up 10 minutes later, lights off, moving slow. He knew what was happening. He was in on it. He'd been briefed, given the rundown, told to respond but not interfere. When he stepped out of the cruiser and saw Karen waving at him like she was summoning a butler, he had to fight the urge to laugh. Then Karen made her final mistake. She walked over to the sheriff, started pointing at the barn, and began ranting. "That's where he keeps the barrels. I saw 2 men loading them yesterday. I have photos. He's dealing out of here. I brought the evidence." The sheriff glanced at me. I stepped forward. My badge flashed under the sun. "Ma'am," I said, "you're trespassing on federal property during an ongoing investigation." Karen blinked. "No, I'm not. This is neighborhood land. I'm the HOA president." "No," I said. "You're currently interfering with a DEA operation." She froze. Her eyes darted between me and the sheriff, then to the buyer, who now had an earpiece and was being joined by 2 other agents. The pieces started connecting in her brain, slowly, painfully, like a dial-up internet connection trying to load a horror movie trailer. "That's not possible," she stammered. I called this in. I'm helping." "No," I said. "You tried to make a deal with a suspected cartel affiliate, sold him falsified intel, and falsely accused a federal agent of corruption. That's obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and illegal surveillance. On federal land." Then the agents stepped in. Karen was placed in cuffs, still yelling, still claiming she was undercover. She screamed about community bylaws as they read her rights. The flash drive was bagged. The map was tagged. And just like that, the HOA president who thought she was saving the neighborhood was officially part of a federal sting. The funniest part? She still didn't shut up. Even in the cruiser, she was demanding a lawyer, insisting she'd been working on behalf of the residents. One of the agents shook his head and muttered, "She really thought this was her show." As the cruiser drove off, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the ranch. My dog barked once and then sat beside me. The barn was quiet. The gate was still open, a little crooked from Karen's rush job to enter. I walked over, closed it, and locked it. And then I noticed something tucked under one of the fence posts. A letter. Sealed. HOA stationery. Handwritten. It said, "Notice of violation, unauthorized surveillance equipment on property perimeter." She'd filed one more complaint on her way in. Even while committing a federal crime, Karen couldn't help herself. But that letter? That gave me an idea. Because Karen might have been out of the picture, but the HOA still thought they could annex my land. And I had just the plan to make sure that never happened. I stood there staring at the letter like it was a piece of performance art. The audacity of this woman was honestly impressive. She'd just been hauled off in handcuffs after walking straight into a federal sting, and yet she'd still found time to leave me one last HOA violation. Unauthorized surveillance equipment. On my own damn ranch. As if the security cameras that caught her trespassing, conspiring, and trying to broker a deal with a suspected cartel affiliate were somehow a problem for me. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so infuriating. But more than anything, it was inspiring. Because that was the moment I realized something. I wasn't done. Karen might have been gone, but the HOA wasn't. In fact, within 2 days of her arrest, the board had the nerve to send me an email titled Interim Compliance Review. Apparently, Karen had temporarily stepped down as president, but her files had been handed over to the board, and they were continuing her efforts to bring all properties within visual and structural harmony. Visual and structural harmony. That's the kind of phrase that makes normal people want to set their own mailbox on fire. They attached a PDF with highlighted photos of my barn, my truck, even my solar panels, claiming I was in violation of everything from noise ordinances to lighting policies. They said a vote would be held to formally incorporate my property into the HOA's jurisdiction. I replied with a photo of my DA badge and the phrase, "Please proceed." But behind the sarcasm, I was already building something. A plan. Not just to stop the annexation, but to dissolve the HOA itself. Permanently. Because after everything Karen had done, after she jeopardized a federal operation, tried to sabotage my water system, filed false reports, and attempted to negotiate with a cartel contact, it became personal. I didn't just want her gone. I wanted the system that enabled her to be dragged down with her. First, I needed intel. Luckily, I had Karen's files. All of them. The ones she threw at my gate before she tried to sell me out. I spent hours going through them, flipping through every red-markered note, every obsessive document, and I found what I was looking for: misappropriation of HOA funds. She'd hired that private investigator with money from the HOA's legal defense budget, and she hadn't disclosed it to the board. Even better, she'd paid him more than twice the usual rate, probably because she was too arrogant to negotiate. Then I found the receipts for the drone. Again, bought using HOA funds under the category of aerial survey. I packaged it all into a nice little folder and sent it, anonymously, of course, to every single homeowner in the neighborhood. But I wasn't done. Next, I filed a request with the county records office. I wanted the original HOA charter, the bylaws, and any amendments filed over the last 10 years. Buried in the legalese was a clause I already suspected existed. If over 60% of property owners voted to dissolve the HOA, it could be terminated. But no one had ever attempted it. Karen's grip had been too strong. Her threats, her fines, her fake citations, she'd ruled through fear. But with her mugshot now floating around in the local news and the neighborhood group chat lighting up like Christmas, the fear was starting to melt. I hosted a barbecue. This time, almost everyone came. Even the retirees Karen used to use as spies. I fed them steak, poured them whiskey, and told them the truth. About Karen. About the investigation. About the sting. About how close she came to ruining something bigger than she could ever understand. I didn't even have to push the vote. They asked for it. One guy, who used to glare at my truck every time I drove past, shook my hand and said, "Hell, I voted for her." I didn't know she was crazy. The next week, the vote happened. 68% voted to dissolve. The HOA was officially finished. I got an email from the board, stunned and scrambling, asking if the results were legitimate. I forwarded it to the county office. The county clerk replied with one word: confirmed. But the real justice came later. See, Karen didn't just violate neighborhood norms. She violated federal laws. Her trial came up a few months after the sting, and I was called to testify. Watching her sit there in a courtroom, trying to explain how she thought she was assisting law enforcement while simultaneously trespassing, conspiring, and slandering a federal agent was a surreal experience. Her defense lawyer tried the well-meaning but misguided citizen angle. My handler showed the footage of her offering intel in exchange for retaliation against her neighbor. That defense died in real time. She was convicted on multiple counts: interference with federal operations, unlawful surveillance, conspiracy to obstruct justice. She didn't go to prison for decades or anything. This wasn't a Hollywood movie. But she got 2 years of probation, a hefty fine, and a permanent mark on her record. She lost her job. Had to sell her house. Moved to a different state, last I heard. Somewhere with no HOA. The irony still makes me laugh. As for the neighborhood, things actually got better. Without Karen's reign of terror, people started living again. Kids played in the front yards without being told their toys were visual clutter. Neighbors stopped reporting each other for excessive wind chimes. Someone even started a community garden. They asked me if they could use a corner of my land for it. I said yes. The soil was good now. No more sewage backups. No more sabotage. Just peace. One morning, about 6 months after the whole thing blew up, I found another letter tucked under my fence. But this time, it wasn't from Karen. It was from one of the older residents, a widow who used to be terrified of getting fined for letting her grandkids draw on the sidewalk with chalk. She wrote, "Thank you for giving us our neighborhood back." I kept that letter. Sometimes, when I'm drinking coffee on the porch, I look out at the gate, The same one Karen trespassed through, the same one she tried to use to gain power. I keep it locked now. Not out of fear, but principle. Peace comes at a price. And sometimes, that price is dealing with a woman so determined to control her surroundings that she ends up caught in her own web. I put up a new sign next to the gate. Simple, honest, to the point. Trespassers will be shot. Survivors will be interrogated. People laugh when they see it. That's fine. Let them laugh. Because I know the truth. The ranch is quiet now. Safe. And no one flies drones over it anymore. Because around here, we remember what happened when one Karen tried. And we don't plan on letting it happen again.